So hello and welcome. So just notice as you've joined this meditation here, notice what's present. And the invitation here is to include the body. Often when we're invited to look at what's present for us, we immediately gravitate to the mind, the thoughts, the parts of us that are planning, decision making, past, future. We tend to go to the intellectual faculties. The invitation here is to notice that as the thinking mind is doing what the thinking mind is very good at doing, your heart is beating without you having to think or do. The breath is breathing itself. And we can just pay attention to this kind of paradox of this being a human. This sort of mind that's very busy planning, strategizing, worrying, loving. And then the body that's in the background, running on sort of autopilot for us. And as we're speaking of the body right now, just notice how can you attend to your body so that you can take up a posture that really serves you. As a gentle reminder here that there's no right way to sit. You are the authority on what happens for you and your body. So if a straight back and a seated cross-legged posture suits you, beautiful. If you just want to lie back, snuggle up to a teddy bear, dive under a duvet, or even go about your day doing the washing up as you listen to this. Great, perfect, welcome. Maybe you're driving. Whatever you are doing, just notice that that's what's present for you in the now. That's who you are now. And an invitation to, again, notice your breath. Mm. Notice the space where your heart is. Both the anatomical heart and where the spiritual heart is in the center of your chest. And notice how there's a connection in between the anatomical heart, spiritual heart, and the breath that comes in. And as we're tuning into the heart, you might find that the thinking mind, different parts of you, are sharing their wisdom, giving you some insights, wanting your attention. See if you can imagine opening the door of your heart and welcoming all the parts in. A really lovely metaphor for this is the Rumi's guest house. And notice that at any moment in time, we have the ability to tune into the multitude, the multiplicity of the inner world. Not only the parts, but also the body, the breath, the heart. But wherever you cast your attention, that's where consciousness seems to go. And also, is it possible for you to see that although your attention, your conscious effort has been perhaps with your mind, with the body, with the heart, with the breath, had you been aware that you still also have toes and fingers and fingernails and hair, although they were outside of your conscious awareness, those things are also made of consciousness. It's just that your net or your focus was a little bit narrower. It wasn't able to include your body as a whole. The invitation now is to widen what was previously maybe just a narrow laser beam focus. See if you can adjust this now so that you are aware of your whole body. So here we're not really attempting to do anything. We're just softening, broadening the focus. We're expanding the focus here to encompass all of you. See if it's possible for you to notice that you have the ability to scale up or scale down. You can be aware of just a small part of you, or maybe just the breath. And then as you expand and broaden and soften that laser beam of focus, you can include all of you. And in this exercise, you might be able to do that at conscious will, consciously zooming in and zooming out. Most of the time, though, in our day-to-day lives, this soft, broad, wide perspective of self unconsciously contracts into a part. And so this soft, broad consciousness narrows down. And often we're not aware of this until we go, oh gosh, I lost my mind then. I lost my temper. Oh, I got very angry then. Until you're halfway through writing a response on a post on social media. And you go, oh, wow, I really snapped into a part there. So most of the time, this ability to zoom in and out, to focus down consciousness to a laser beam point, and to then expand, sort of happens outside of your conscious will. It's a bit like the breath. It seems to happen on autopilot without you noticing. Whereas here we can see that we have some sort of conscious ability to zoom in and zoom out. So again, see if you can broaden, expand your awareness to include your total, your whole body, your whole being. And how about now, even the electromagnetic field of your heart, about 1 meter or about 3 feet all around your body. So that your awareness is now above you, below you, behind you, in front, and all around. The image that comes to me is that I form a bit of a bubble. There's like a bubble around the physical body as I cast my 3 feet or a meter all around me. And notice how it feels for your parts. To be in this bubble. With this broad, expanded perspective. And if your parts are feeling safe enough, you might right now be enjoying a sense of easing into this bubble. You might even notice how your body feels. And you might find that as you become more and more safe in this bubble, the body lets go a little bit, eases, loosens, softens, opens to the ground. Follows the law of gravity. And you might notice that just as when I first asked what's present for you, maybe there was a tendency to focus on the mind, not really being aware of the breath or the heart or your feet. The same thing happens in the inner world. Although we may be narrowly focusing through a part, that doesn't mean that within self, within consciousness, self is not aware of all of your parts, all at once. So the part we're in may have a narrow focus and not be aware of anything else. And yet self is just behind. Aware of not just the part that we've narrowed into, but also all of the parts, even the exiles. So the guest house of self is round. Which corner can a part hide in? Which corner in this roundhouse is inaccessible to self? And some parts might not like the thought that there are no corners to hide in here. They might enjoy, on some level, being hidden away from self. And yet, which corner is there to go to in a space that is totally accepting, totally loving, welcoming of everything? But sometimes, if parts haven't met self yet, they project their idea of an adult caregiver onto self. And typically that adult caregiver would be one of our parents or grandparents or whoever we spent most of our time with when we were growing up. And from that perspective, from that point of view, we can maybe validate the part and say, yeah, I see why you would be afraid of self. If you're viewing self through the lens of your caregiver. And yet maybe you're far enough in your journey now to introduce self, to demystify this view. Sometimes when the parts have had painful experiences with external figures, people who should have looked after us, it can be very hard for these parts to see that there's anything on the inside that is totally loving and accepting. The self could be quite an alien concept to some of our parts. And self knows this. And this is why self does not impose itself. It doesn't get angry or upset that the parts have projected some kind of an image of self onto it. It simply extends its welcome. There's no hurry for this. Sometimes if there's a sense of urgency that comes on our healing journey, that may well be a therapist part or a self-like part, a manager part. There's a feeling of efforting, of having to work hard. Self doesn't do that. Self accepts, understands, and knows that it will take a while to demystify, clarify this view that the parts held. So we validate first. Yes, it makes sense that you're fearful of me. given what you've been through. It's a little bit like if you're walking through a forest and you see a wounded, injured animal. And this animal's been badly mistreated by humans. And this animal sees you. And it freezes with fear. There's going to be more harm now. And all you want is to help this animal. But the moment you approach it, it starts to run. It doesn't trust you. What would you do in this case? Would you run after it, chase it, try and capture it, prove that you're not trying to harm it? What would be the best thing? Maybe you'd take your time. Maybe you'd visit the spot every day, checking in. Maybe you'd put out a bowl of water or some food, some nourishment. It will take as long as it will take to gain the trust of this wounded animal in the forest. And every day you come back, and one day the animal doesn't start running off. It stands there looking at you as you look at it. And then its eyes soften, its body softens, and it lies down. And this is a sign that you're able to now walk up to it. And one day you'll find that the animal lets you stroke it. And maybe one day it comes back home with you, back home to self. And maybe a year passed, maybe 2 years passed. It doesn't matter. Maybe you've been doing this for 30 years. And now in the place that you are at, there's loads of animals that were wounded, injured, wary of humans once. And now there's lots of them. grazing on the land that you've built for them. So self does not impose itself. Self has that panoramic perspective. So it knows, it already knows. How slowly and gently self doesn't go by its own pace, it goes by the part's pace. It attunes. How's that heart of yours? Had you been aware of the breath, or was it just doing its own breathing thing? Is it possible for you to realize that multiple things, in fact, infinite things, are happening all at the same time, the majority of which you're not aware of? And the more we broaden and soften our focus, the more we can make space. Is it possible that without the awareness of the part that wants healing for us, the therapist part, and all the multitude of self-like parts, is it possible that the rest of the parts are already safe within self and are already on their own unique journey to healing, without the doership of the healer part? Just as when I first asked you to be present to what's here now, it was probably impossible for you to be aware of the breath, the heart, and the thinking, and the toes, and the hair, all at the same time. And yet that doesn't mean that those things weren't true, or that those things weren't doing their own flowing. So the same is true in our inner world. Although we may not be consciously attending to all the parts all at once, they're in a perpetual state of heading towards healing, towards self. That's one of the inner laws of physics, that everything is already making the hero's or the heroine's journey. Without you needing to be aware of it or conscious of it or doing anything. Well, that's a beautiful thing. It's a wonderful thing. Maybe some of your parts are like, oh, thank gosh. I've been waiting my turn here for 3 years since you found out about this whole IFS thing. And I saw you attend to the inner critic. I saw you attend to the judge. I saw you attend to the angry part, the sad part, the grieving part. But I've just been patiently waiting here. And now you're telling me that I've been healing all along. Great. So the part can come out of the waiting room and maybe tune into this inner law of physics, that it's already, by the virtue of being immersed in self and seated with self energy, it's already making that journey. Even the exiled parts. To assume that parts of the inner world stop unless you have conscious focus on them would be to say that the moment you stop thinking about your heartbeat or your breathing, that your heart stops. And that's simply not the case. And then the natural question comes when we do therapy, who is the one doing therapy? Who's the doer? So in IFS, we hope it's the self. And from the non-dual point of view, on some level, it cannot not be self. What do I mean by that? Self is primal. So we can say that at best, self is a little bit blended with or obscured by a part, but it's always self underneath. Just like the body remains a body, although it's clothed. Do the clothes that you wear change your body? Do the clouds change the sun, or does it just block its visibility? So in the same way, self is always present, self is primal, and parts may well blend to a lesser or greater extent, but ultimately it's always self. How's the breath? How's the heart doing? Which corner are the parts hiding in the roundhouse of self? Which parts still shriek away from the notion of having a caregiver here, a leader? And whose face have they projected onto self? Self's face is the face before you were born. Self's face is the face before your parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, teachers, church figures, peers were here. Self's face is before your great-grandfather and your great-great-great-grandfather. Self's face is before the dinosaurs were here. So whose face are the parts that still don't trust self? Whose face have they projected onto self? And maybe they're willing to hand that back. So see how it feels if your parts have been able to hand faces back. See how it feels to come back to a bubble. This bubble that we started off with, this sense of the expansive perspective of self, softness, openness, about a meter, 3 feet or so, all around, as your heart radiates its energy. You can come back to that bubble. And see if you can thank your parts for being here, for joining you on this journey, on this heroic journey. And just before we come back to the sharing circle, see if you can let your parts know that we're going to transition now. Maybe reconnecting with your physical body. Maybe giving yourself a hug. If you're lying down, drawing your knees into your chest. Rolling over on one side. And again, if it feels right, sending gratitude to any parts that have joined you on this journey. And as you open your eyes, see if you can reorient yourself in the space. Thank you for joining me.